theories. These are the main ones that show up. There might be one or two other ones that you might see in like an errant question somewhere, but when you get questions like that, usually what happens is that these main ones are like three out of your four options, so you can kind of use that to get to the answer via process of elimination. Sorry. So the theories are functionalism, conflict theory, symbolic interactionism, social constructionism, exchange rationalist choice, and feminist theory. So these theories are just um, six different ways of looking at how society functions and how people interact, basically. So they're categorized into two groups, microsociological and macrosociological. So just like it sounds, macrosociology looks at larger groups and kind of like the bigger picture of how society functions. So how do institutions affect individuals? Those types of things. On the other hand, microsociology really looks at interactions between individuals and how individuals interact with the environment. And so, how do these interactions affect society on a larger scale? So, out of these six theories, I categorized in parentheses that functionalism is macro, conflict is macro, social constructionism is macro, feminist theory is macro, and then symbolic interactionism and exchange rational choice are micro. So, I'll go into that a little bit more when we look at each theory. Right. So functionalism, and then the format that I have for these slides are have the people associated with the theories, kind of like the takeaway about what this theory is saying, and then any other related terms you should know. So the theorist associated with functionalism is Emily Durkheim. Um, and the concept is basically that society exists in an equilibrium and the institutions that make it up serve to maintain that equilibrium. So, having said that, the two main terms that you need to know related to functionalism are manifest function and latent function. So, mention the institutions that maintain society. So, in that, for a given institution, there's a manifest function. So, institutions are created to serve a specific function and have maintain societal structure. For example, schools are designed to educate people. So on the other hand, latent functions are unintended, often unrecognized consequences. And I noticed in the 300-page psych soc document, they said that these are usually positive, but I don't think they are exclusively positive. Um, they're just kind of like any hidden functions, basically. And an example of this is that schools' manifest function is education, but they're also a site of socialization. There's a place where it's a place where you kind of learn the rules of society, how people treat you, how you should treat people, etc. Sorry, I didn't notice that message in the chat. Everyone else can hear okay though, so I'm not sure what I can do. This is being recorded. So, all right, so I'll just move on to the next theory for now. So next I have symbolic interaction. Wait, did I skip one? Oh, yes. So conflict theory is pretty easy to digest. Person associated with this is Karl Marx. The concept is basically that in society, different groups clash over acquiring limited resources, and then the reason for that is either like a power conflict or just kind of like a survival um, issue when you have limited resources. Symbolic interactionism is associated with George Mead, and the fundamental concept is that individuals attach meaning to things, words, gestures, or other symbols, and then communicate and interact with other people using these meanings. And so society is kind of a combination of these smaller scale interactions between small groups. And this is one of the if you ever get questions about micro versus macro socialism, sociology, it'll usually have to do with symbolic interactionism. Though we were able to classify all the theories into micro versus macro, this is the one that really stands out on the micro side. Um, on the macro scale, usually it's referring to fundamentalism, functionalism. Sorry, all these like words sound the same, and that's kind of the problem with this section is it's just a lot of things that sound similar, but once you memorize it, it's like not too bad. Okay. Social constructionism is probably one of the most confusing things when you combine it with symbolic interactionism. There's no theorist that you really need to know for this. Because if you look at the concept, it says that people in society agree to create a specific meaning to something, and then society exists based on this meaning. So, for example, money, race, and gender, particularly just let's just talk about money. It's like piece of paper or like coins, things that don't intrinsically have any value, but are of extreme importance to our society. And this is only possible because we as a society have agreed to take it as such. And gender is also a social construct because people in power kind of determined um, different people's values in past eras based on their skin color. Race doesn't really have like a biological basis, so there's nothing like inherently true about it. And similarly, gender is increasingly being agreed upon as like a social construct. So I think for me at least, this sounds like really similar to symbolic interactionism in that you're creating value on something or creating attaching meaning to something. So the distinction to take away from it is that social interactionism is really on a micro scale while social constructionism is on a much more macro scale. So in this example, like money, race, gender are things that kind of um, like any person in society kind of can associate what their meaning is, while social interactionism can be like it can even be something really simple like as a look that you give to a person. So it's really on that like macro person to person interaction kind of. Hopefully a coming question will or help illustrate this at least a little bit. Okay. The fifth, fourth, um, no, this is fifth. The fifth theory is this theory called exchange rational choice theory, sometimes called just exchange theory, sometimes called rational choice theory, mostly referring to the same thing. Again, no people that you need to know associated with this. A concept is that people always, the view of this theory is that people always weigh costs and benefits and then take the most rational action that gives them the biggest benefit. So it explains basically all social interactions, family, work, relationships, and any interpersonal relationships, according to this theory, all arise out of individuals gauging whether those relationships benefit them and taking the um, appropriate rational action after weighing those. And there's a couple of assumptions to know about this. They don't show up too much, but these words can kind of show up sometimes. So this is completeness, transitivity, and independence. So completeness is basically saying that every action can be ranked in relative to each other. So choice one, you should be able to say choice one is better than choice two, and choice two is better than choice three. And then the next step of that is transitivity. So kind of like math logic, I guess. So this is saying that you should say, because you know that choice one is better than choice two, and choice two is better than choice three, um, choice one therefore should be better than choice three. Lastly, you should be able to assume independence of irrelevant alternatives. So if you add a fourth choice, it won't change the rankings of choice one, two, and three. So if choice four is better than choice two, um, the previously agreed upon pattern shouldn't fall apart. So in that case, choice one would still be better than choice four, but then choice four would be better than choice two, and then choice two will still be better than choice three, etc. Lastly, we have feminist theory. Again, no people really need to memorize for this. This can be seen as a subset of conflict theory at times, but feminist theory has a little bit more nuance in that you can kind of see, like I listed here, it can be seen as just gender difference, can be seen in terms of gender inequality or gender oppression, structural oppression. So these two kind of fall more into conflict theory, but I guess this would um, sound more like functionalism, as in like men and women kind of having different roles in society. And that's why it's important to have a perspective that looks from the women's side of things. So there's no particular idea that um, is like you can really sum up this theory. It basically is just looking at society from a woman's perspective and examining female roles and expectations in different parts of society. Sorry, let me go back, Jasmine. So, what did I say? Wouldn't choice four be better than choice one? If you said,
Yeah, so like the question that I had was that you said that choice four would be better than choice two, but then couldn't that also be better than choice one if you just said that it was better than choice two? I don't know if that makes sense.
yeah, 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 yeah. I see. Yeah, that wasn't like a great example. Um, yeah, it's more so like saying that choice four being better than choice two doesn't negate choice one still being better than choice two. Does that kind
Oh,
of
okay, so
make more
like it
sense?
just doesn't matter exactly where it goes, but like the order will still be the same, that one is first, then two, then three.
Yeah, like adding choice four wouldn't change the existing order.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. All right. So, oh, all right. So this is a first stop, and so we're done with looking at theories. Does anyone have questions before I move on to a couple questions? All right. So first question, and I will launch a poll. Which of the statements about this should be conflict theory? Sorry. All right. So which of these following choices is false in regards to conflict theory? Does it arise out of competition for limited resources? Conflict cannot be eradicated completely. Is the status quo after conflict always improved when compared to the status quo previous to the conflict? And is conflict an abrupt, violent process? Give you 40 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it now. So share the results. Most of you guys picked D. Does anyone want to explain kind of? No worries if you don't. Or explain why you, if you're in A or B, why you picked that one.
Just A or B.
No, no, no. Anyone can go.
Okay, it's just a small group of people, so.
Yeah.
But conflict theory, I think it ends up going a lot towards. I like to think about these in like different, like larger case scenarios, and so it goes a little bit to like feminist theory of to why there's a limited resources and it has like some socioeconomic status, but why there's these small amount of people that have so much and other people who don't, and how we can't really fix that. So obviously the whole thing is that A is completely true because that is what it is. There's this conflict for these resources, and then it cannot be eradicated completely. That is also true, simply because, as I was saying, there's this limited amount of resources. So, and then after conflict is not always an improvement over the status quo leading to the conflict. Obviously not, because before the conflict, it's like, it ends up being like this is institutionalized, where like the lack of something towards a certain group is long lasting. So that's how I went with D, because yeah, it
Yeah.
really doesn't have anything to do with violence. It has to do with just reality of what we have and what we don't have, and it's a very passive process at the same time. You oftentimes don't know that it's happening.
Yeah, perfect. That was a really great way to like think through it. So I'll share like what. So this is from Khan Academy. This is their exact explanation. Yeah. So I think the reason that why they probably had D is because people might associate conflict with like violence, but it's more so it's like this long lasting competition slash tension for when you're competing for limited resources. Um, yeah. Does anyone have any questions on that? If you picked A or B instead? Okay. Next question. We'll relaunch the poll. So this is kind of asking you to think about like which of these questions fits a symbolic interactionism approach. So how did the Stonewall riots change the way the US viewed homosexuality? Would the Indian independence movement be the same if Gandhi had a different upbringing? How did the signing of the Magna Carta change the role of the nobility in 13th century England? Indeed, did the boycott have lasting effects on the consumption and distribution of goods and services in India? So this is like from a passage, but I don't think you really need to know that constant context to understand like which of the question matches with the theory. So just think about like which choice has to do with like attaching meaning to something and how that would affect like interpersonal interactions. Alright, I'll go ahead and stop it now. So, so this one was I wasn't the biggest fan of it. And part of the reason why I picked this question was kind of to show that even like Khan Academy, which a lot of people like, doesn't have the best answer choices or explanations sometimes. And kind of to like plug for UWorld here, UWorld has by far the best psych soc resources. So if anyone hasn't gotten it and they're kind of like close to their test date, I would fully recommend it. And if you have like any questions about that, we can talk about it also. But their explanations are always super clear and their questions are also very close to AMC styles. So that's probably the number one thing that can improve your psych score in addition to like reading that 300-page document. So okay, back to the question. So the answer is actually A, um, which can be like I feel like it's can be argued that this is social constructionism because this isn't really like on an interpersonal scale. But their explanation is that um, the feelings that people have towards homosexuality changing is the meaning attached to a concept in society changing. So therefore, there's a shift in meaning, and that's kind of like the central tenet of symbolic interactionism. So that meaning is flexible. So yeah.
I
So
have a quick
see,
question. I know that
yeah, go
there's
ahead.
like when I was like studying things and I thought it was this one, but the fact that we as a society decide what has value, and it was something along the lines of if like nothing actually has value, we just determine that it is. So like money or things like race and that kind of thing. So that's where I was thinking about this, but it seems that this right, that's what I was thinking, symbolic interactionism, that things are symbols and we put value on them. But I'm not sure if this is the same thing for that. And especially looking at I just get like a bit confused.
So it's like not necessarily. Sorry if I don't understand your question. Feel free to please correct me or say it again. So I think um like meaning is a broader word that can capture the essence of symbolic interactionism rather than values necessarily. Um, so like, uh, yeah, this one is. So how did you think about C? Because I think that's the one that I thought would have been right too. But now that I'm looking at it, I like cannot wrap my head around it again. If you don't mind explaining it to me.
To me, it was I ended up picking C because it was giving like a concrete thing, connecting it to an idea. It was giving symbol to the Magna Carta and how that could affect society. But maybe it's just like it all needs to be more abstract, like all symbols, because the first one is strictly like symbol of homosexuality versus C, where it's talking about the role.
Yeah, like I think Olivia said just in the chat. I think that's the word role that really throws it off because that kind of recalls to me more like functionalism, like they're serving a purpose. But then so it's like a
Yeah,
legal document, right? So it's not like social change or like the meaning is not changing, but there's like formal legislation to change like
right.
explicitly like a function. But no,
Yeah,
definitely
that actually,
definitely
yeah.
definitely a not great quality question. Yeah, Caitlin, it, even like between that, I feel like this is not saying like it kind of is looking at not even it's like not even on a micro scale because this is saying like how society at a large views homosexuality. So that's why I think it it doesn't really stick to the exact concept of symbolic interactionism being micro. But I think it's just the one that fits the best. And part of the reason why I picked this is sometimes you just have like not great answer choices, so you pick the one that just kind of goes best with it. But hopefully, most questions you see will be more clear than this.
So for C, that has to do more with stratification rather than like symbolic interactionism. And then D is quite literal. And then I guess B has to do more with more psychological than sociological, which just leaves A.
So I could, yeah, I would think about it in terms of like which theory does the rest of the answer choices matches with. So I think C is like functionalism. D is probably also functionalism, or like conflict theory maybe. Um, B, mm, B I think is like not really a sociological related concept. I think it's like the identity of one person. Does that make sense? It's like not a perfect explanation. I know. Sorry.
So I chose C, and I did so because like I thought like the gesture of signing was like attaching a meaning, and the meaning was like nobility, and so like that's kind of like why, because like actually in question C they linked both, while A was kind of more abstract. It didn't say like exactly what the gesture was to like, communicate the meaning or what the attachment was. That was my train of thinking.
Yeah, I think it's like in C, it's not that signing is a symbol. I think they literally just meant that after this um, document was passed, like how did that change the role? Does that make sense? I think the wording is vague, but the way they intended it was like, how did this piece of document change the function of nobility, rather than like how did the symbolic thing of signing change like the view.
Okay, yeah, kind of. I probably still would get it wrong, like in the real thing, if this is the
Yeah,
question.
yeah. It's just not a great question. Sorry. I don't know. If anyone really can explain it better too, like I'm all for it. But yeah, I think the moral of this question is just to watch out for crappy questions sometimes and just like take the L if you need to. Right. So moving on, this one is far more mm, should be a bit more clear. So how do functionalists explain deviance? So kind of connecting two different topics. So you should know what deviance is and then also know what functionalism is. I'm gonna stop it now. So almost everyone picked D. Um, One of you picked B, and so this is actually a pretty easy fix. So B says group in power imposes its definition, and that's almost always a straight giveaway that that's conflict theory. So when there's like two competing groups or a group of like elite and like regular people, that's a giveaway that it's conflict theory. So the reason why D is correct is because it talks about like how societies have ways to socialize people. So those are kind of the institutions that serve purpose to maintain um, a balance in society. But deviance is just rare cases in which um, that kind of like carefully constructed system is unsuccessful, basically. Is that okay now? Yeah, deviance. Let me look up. Yeah, broadly defined, deviance is any behavior that is outside of societal norms, like you said. Matuli, what do you mean by
There's
define?
4 different like sociological ideas of deviance, and so the functional is what we're talking about right now. And so saying that it's needed to make these boundaries of between like society, and that's why we need deviance, and why we have deviance. And then the differential, it has to do with the interaction. So I would say that it would be A is differential, and then strain theory has to do that society itself is promoting deviance. So sort of saying that because there's racial inequality, because there's other things, and these people are subjected to maybe rob something or to commit a crime because of,
Mm.
we are creating that. And then the labeling theory is just saying that who gets to decide what defiance is. It's really relative culturally. So I don't know which one.
Yeah, but so these are like causes for like deviance, like these are explaining why deviance occurs, but like in all of them, like it's applicable that deviance is just a violation of societal norms, right? Like that definition can apply to all four.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. That's awesome. All right. Let me go back to this one slide really quickly. So that was it for sociological theories. Now we're just going to look at social institutions. Um, so these are kind of like units of society that have different functions. Kind of hard to like define in some cases, but obviously like not unfamiliar. So really, you'll get tested mostly on education, family, religion, government, economy, health, and medicine. So education, um, we can look at it in terms of there's really like so the format that I have for these institutions is just to look at terms that are associated with those institutions. Like I don't need to like define education, right? So um, the two terms that you need to know are hidden curriculum and teacher expectancy. So hidden curriculum is kind of like similar to the idea of latent function. Like I had that earlier example of how the manifest function of schools is to educate, but then there's also latent functions of like socializing children. So similarly, the hidden curriculum is how children learn like social cues, how to behave with other people, and also internalize how they get treated by other people. So an example was like if teachers treat boys and girls differently, the hidden curriculum is that schools are teaching children that males or females get treated differently out in the real world. And the other term that you need to know is teacher expectancy. So this is a theory that teachers have different expectations from different students based on whatever like background that may be. So it could be like racial like prejudice or gender prejudice, like different things. But so to define this, it's basically like saying, for examples, if teachers expect less from students who normally perform below average, then those students might have like an inclination to um, work less hard because they know that their teacher expects less from them, so they kind of fulfill that expectation. Okay, and then not much to say on family except know that there's different forms of like kinships, which is basically how people are related, and that the idea of a family is kind of evolving, and so it's no longer like mom, dad, and kids. So like a family can really mean anything, and the size of a family can kind of adjust to social and economic needs. So pre like urbanization or industrialization, people had a lot of kids to maintain like the family farm or something, but now that's not a model that is really required by society. So um, that's just to understand like families are the concept of family is constantly changing. Next is religion, and this might be a word that you might not be familiar with. So religiosity, pretty similar to like it's just like the extent to a person which is religious. So like, do you go to church occasionally? Go to church on like only Christmas, Easter? Are you spiritual or religious versus like you really adhere to religion in every aspect of your life? And then there's these four terms which refer to different levels of like religious institutions. So I'm going to start off with churches. So these are just established religious bodies, and I know this specifically says churches, and that's how it's defined in that document. But I guess like it's different words for different religions, like temples, like mosques, etc. Um, and so ecclesia, I think that's how you say it, is specifically a dominant religion that includes most members of a society. So in a lot of Latin American countries, that would be Catholicism, Islam in a lot of Middle Eastern countries, etc. So I think the idea is that religion um, kind of mandates like expected behavior within the population aside from just being like a religion. And then sects are smaller than churches, usually established in response or particularly uh, as a protest to larger churches. So there was an example of like Mormonism. And then cults are the least socially acceptable form. They're radical and they reject mainstream social values. And they are unlikely to last long simply because they rely on the cult of personality, and the person's lifetime is only so long, and people are likely to not like believe in the power of one person for a long time either. So cults aren't exactly, or like counterculture isn't necessarily radical. Like it's just something in response to like an unfavorable mainstream culture, like hippie culture, and the what is it, like the 70s or 80s is like the usual example of counterculture. So like that's not necessarily radical. Um, so I guess they have that similar concept of like rejecting mainstream values, but I think like counterculture is still like societally acceptable. It's just like weird, but cults are like not okay. Is that okay? Okay. And the only other thing to know about religion is this idea of secularization and fundamentalism. So, secularization is just the idea with modernization, people are getting less religious. So, religion has a ever weakening hold on society in terms of values and political power. So, fundamentalism is a reaction to secularization. So, when whether it's like religious authority or people who are strictly religious notice the weakening power of religions, they may turn to extremely adherent beliefs like before to make sure that their religion doesn't lose relevance. Okay. And for this, you just kind of need to be aware of like what a government is, like the different roles it has, and like setting up rules or like the economy, and just know what democracy, dictatorship, communism, monarchy, capitalism, and socialism are. But nothing too in depth about this. So, health and medicine, need to know a good bit of terms for this. So, medicalization is this idea that conditions that were previously not thought of as being illnesses are now getting labeled as medical conditions that should be diagnosed and treated. So, um, mental illness is probably the easiest example. ADHD as well. Like before, you might have just called your kids like active, but now there's like medications to actually treat it. And a more nuanced example that was on the document as well was this idea of birth like being a very natural thing, so you don't like intervene really. But now like C sections are really um, like prevalent. So this idea of kind of shifting away from like natural birth as well. And then so sick role is another term. This is saying that society kind of gives passes to people who are ill to take a break from their responsibilities, so that they can get better, basically. But it is expected that after they get better, they should be able to return to their previous roles. So illness experience is a little bit sounds a little bit similar to the sick role, except this is looking at the individual's perspective, whereas the sick role is kind of looking at this is how society views sick people. So the illness experience really looks at how the sick person copes with being ill, and how their self identity can be altered, and how their interactions with other people can be changed because people treat people differently when they're sick versus when they're not. And then a couple more terms. Social epidemiology is this idea that people have worse or better health outcomes, access to healthcare based on their identities, such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, neighborhood, like, can't really, and other things. So basically, just social identities affecting people's health. Sorry. The other terms to know are just tenets of medical ethics. So beneficence is this idea that you want to do good for your patients, and then um, counterpart to that is non-malfeasance. So you don't want to harm your patients, and then respect your patient autonomy, and then do what's just and right. And these are just summaries of kind of the goals of healthcare, like where we want to take American healthcare in the future. And the problems that it's having right now is that there's inequities, like I said, in terms of social identities. Medicare and Medicaid are expensive, but do serve vulnerable populations, but also leave out a lot of people who are uninsured as well. And then we spend a lot of money on healthcare proportional to the GDP, but still have worse outcomes than a lot of developed nations. So the goals looking ahead are increase access to care and decrease cost, prevent disease, obviously, and this is a really important problem that um, American healthcare is expensive, primarily in part to the fact that a lot of patients don't have access to primary care. So when they do seek healthcare, problems are exacerbated. So increasing access to general physicians would is theorized to help. And then increase education of the public, decrease paternalism. So this the idea that like doctors talk down to their patients and don't listen. So um, I think that is changing a little bit at least. And then reduce economic conflicts for interest for patients. So this is referring to um, changing how physicians are compensated. So there's an idea that physicians kind of order more tests or order more procedures that patients might not need because that's how they get compensated more. So looking at how to compensate physicians instead on outcomes instead of number of services utilized. Okay. Just a quick part on culture. So culture is again like super hard to define in words, but the guidelines that people use to live in a certain society. Um, and it's adaptable, it builds on itself, and most importantly, it's transmitted to the next generation. And there's material culture, which is like tangible things, and then symbolic culture. Um, yeah, not much to say on that. So again, a couple of terms to know, like nothing too hard to memorize. Values, beliefs, norms, rituals, cultural barriers. Or I guess it's talking about like interactions between people of different cultures, like maybe referring to like patients and doctors. Let's see, question. Oh, so cultural diffusion is the spread of a culture to like different parts of the world. So like I don't know why I'm thinking of this right now, but like K-pop has been like spreading in the last decade or two. So that's an example of like cultural diffusion. Culture transmission is like parents teaching their kids their culture, like immigrants or like just like anyone just passing on like traditions to their next generation. So I guess like cultural diffusion is like horizontal, or then cultural transmission is like vertical. Okay, so I have this poll. I think this is the last question. Pretty simple. I'm gonna go ahead and stop it. Oh, yeah. So, all right. So yeah, everyone got it right. Not much to explain about it. It's just that culture is relative, and like meanings of things are relative from culture to culture. Oh, okay, so that was everything. Thanks for like staying till the end. I know it was like nothing too difficult, but we haven't had too many sessions on behavioral sciences, so I wanted to touch on it. And so, even if you have questions on things not related to this topic, we can talk about it now if you want to. Even if it's just like questions about strategies. Does everyone have that 300-page document? Because I can send it to you right now if you don't. Okay. Gonna let me do alright. So if no one has any questions, that was the end of it. Thank you guys for coming. Have a good weekend. And I will stay till the end if anyone wants to ask any questions in private. Have a good night, you guys. So, Melissa, I can't remember which one I used. I think I used the 90-page one and then kind of just did you